Follow that dream.
Follow your dreams.
With all your might, you're a beacon.
You're a beacon.
So let your light shine
Let your light
bright.
shine
Let
bright.
that dream guide you to your destiny. Be the best of what you were meant to be.
To see Jamaica move in a new direction.
Good politicians
That represent our intentions.
good education, less kids in detention.
Where we run things, did I forget to mention?
Dream fi pass couple and CXC. My dream fi have the doctorate and every degree.
And erase negative mentality.
I see everybody proud of me. So we a tell them, you have a dream, me have one too.
So make we talk about what we drink and do to make life better for me and you.
I me say where we a go do, we a go
Talk about we dream, act about we dream.
now skylark with the dream.
Know that dream of the Republic dream. And we Republic are gonna grow that dream.
My dream is to live in peace. One sleep on me veranda, now fi fear thief. Tired of the indiscipline that a cause the community nothing but grief.
I say my dream fi child abuses. Want stop it trafficking local and overseas. Let me tell you about the dreams of dreams. I feel live in a place where no two need police. You have a dream, me have one too.
So make we talk about what we drink and do to make life better for me and you.
I me say where we a go do, we a go
Talk about we dream, act about we dream.
now skylark with the dream.
Know that dream of the Republic dream. And we Republic are gonna grow that dream. My dream is a Jamaican head, no Queen as head, no royal head.
We want, you know what I mean?
What you mean?
You see?
To be united and to be uplifting as a nation could be. Jamaica, say that I feel we country. All positivity, we have to force it.
My dream for our republic is that we live as one, where instead of a few making decisions, we have more inclusion, where every man respects woman and woman respects man. I just want love we I deal with, no discrimination.
We a go walk with the dream, talk with the dream. Now skylark with the dream, know that dream, show that dream. We a go plant and grow that dream. We a go plant and grow that dream.
He is currently an associate professor and associate vice president at the University of Technology, and he has been in education for 3 decades. Doc has told us that he began to get interested in national affairs from he was a teenager. And this has led to him writing 14 books, the 2 of the last that I've had a pleasure to look at, one to read, Active Citizenship, Overcoming Political Apathy in Jamaica. Very, very relevant for this discussion. And the one that I started reading and finished in 2019, but Doc, I still have volume 3 to read, is Jamaica, A Paradise and a Paradox, volumes 1, 2, and 3. So Doc, we're really happy to have you here with us. We know you also do quite a bit of public commentating. So it's really good that you'll be here to share with us these thoughts that you've been collecting on engaging as a citizen. We have with us Dr. Horace, well, we should really call Horace Dr. Horace Levy, because I think my entry into advocacy, Horace has been a mentor. Horace has been showing me the art and science of advocacy, and he has a wide range of experience. He's the former executive director for Jamaicans for Justice. He's the former deputy chairman for the Peace Management Initiative. He's currently a board director for Stand Up Jamaica and of my organization, the Jamaica Accountability Meter portal. And you guys are familiar with Horace because he's a social commentator and an advocate par excellence. Horace's latest book, which was just published about a month ago, Jamaica, the Fractured Nation, Vibrant People, focuses on our political history, but from the perspective of the civil society. I recommend it highly. And last but never ever least, we have a youth advocate, a young lady who we've had the pleasure of getting to know over the last couple of weeks, Sabrina Barnes. Sabrina, wow, is up to so much in her young age. This is an under 20, I think it's reasonable for me to say that, an under 20 young Jamaican woman, a recent graduate of the Carteret College, where she was involved in public relations, loved to talk to people, loved to engage. She's into drama, the student council executive, loves to debate, is a part of the debate society, is into journalism, so she's a chief editor of their newspaper, president of the Youth for Youth establishment, a child advocate for the Jamaica Association of the Deaf, and by no means least, Sabrina's desire is not just to be an entrepreneur, but an attorney at law and to get involved with journalism. So this is the reason for sharing this, folks, as I hand over is it's good to know who we're with.
So as we start our evening's event, we have to give Jeanette thanks. I mean, after that, I don't think I need to do much, save and except to say why it is that we're going to go into this panel discussion now. And we want to do that in the context of looking at Jamaica going into her 60th year. When I look at 60 years, I look at Sabrina, I look at myself, and I listen to the comments that have been made by Jeanette about the seniority of Dr. Paul Ivey and Horace Levy, and I go, we have a panel that can give us some retrospective view on voices. We're going to be talking this evening about voices. Whose voices are we listening to? What's the voice that speaks the loudest? And as I'm sure Horace, who has told me to call him Horace, I'm going to be struggling with that throat. If you hear me hesitate, it's because I'm trying. Horace is going to say to us, but who is listening? So even if you have a voice, who is listening? So this evening, we want to have that conversation. In Jamaica, we're not short of talking, we talk enough. Question, is anybody listening? And if they are listening, do they have to listen? So Jeanette put it right on the table. That document she showed us, the Constitution. We started our first panel discussion saying, let's remove the Queen and think about how we want to develop and govern this new Jamaica. So Jamaica at 61, Jamaica at 70, what will our governing structure look like? Should we have something that's more engaging? And that's what we're here to talk about. How do we listen to voices? How do we strengthen voices if necessary? How do we talk truth to power? Converting the chatting to actual power. And that's what we're going to be doing this afternoon with Dr. Ivey, Horace Levy, and Sabrina Barnes. So the first thing I want to ask to Horace, as we start this conversation, our theme is strengthening the voice. What voice? Whose voice are we talking about?
Ordinary people's voices, and not just, when I say civil society, not just a few NGOs or civil society organizations' voices, but everybody who is not in government and not in the private sector is part of civil society. It's their voices we want to hear.
So you've identified civil society, people out of government, but when we think about where we are now and the conversations of the past, there were discussions and we've done consultations on crafting the Constitution. Dr. Ivey, whose voice is heard? Who has the loudest voice?
Thank you, Madam Moderator. There is a saying that if one is not being heard, one is not speaking loudly enough. And so the question is, who are the persons who are actually speaking, and are they speaking loudly enough such that they are being heard? It has also been said that it is the squeaky wheel that gets the grease. And so we have a situation in Jamaica where it doesn't appear to me that the ordinary citizens appreciate the role of a citizen in a democracy, the centrality of citizens in a democracy. And so the issue of consciousness raising in that regard, as it relates to the duties, roles, and responsibilities that inhere in the office of citizen. And so when it comes to voices and which voices are being heard, we need to appreciate that in a democracy, the citizen is central to it, and the ordinary person, that is the essence and the genius of democracy, whereby the ordinary citizen, without rank, without stripes, without any appurtenances thereto, have the right to speak and to be heard and to discuss matters of national affairs and matters of concern them. So where we need to go forward now, it's a question of empowerment and making citizens aware of the roles and the responsibilities that they have, so that their voice becomes meaningful and are heard in the marketplace of ideas and in the corridors of power and decision making.
marketplace of ideas and the corridors of decision making. But you know, Dr. Ivy, it sounds quite theoretical to me, to be fair. We talk about ordinary citizens, the man in the taxi, the pushcart vendor. Are they feeling inclusive? And this is where I will turn to you, Sabrina, because you've heard Horace identify who the voice is. You've heard Dr. Ivy tell us about the ordinary citizen and empowerment. But is it really true that in the context of Jamaica, 60 years on, that there is a voice coming from the citizenry, which includes even yourself as a young person?
It's really interesting, actually, because yes, you want to include everybody, but does everybody think that they should be included? Do they feel like if they come up to the forefront and actually speak, that they would be listened to? Yes, there's something in the Constitution that says that we have the right to freedom of speech, but nothing says that somebody's there to listen to us, that somebody will accept who's saying it and how it's being said, and the different approach that persons have. So yes, we have the different isolated societies, and even young people. I'll continue to say it, that we've been removed from the solution. So, you know, we become the problem. Who will actually put the time out to listen to somebody that's of a certain age? No, man, you don't know where I talk about. Humble yourself, you're so rich there, you're the future. So I would have to, you know, not really agree, because even though we know, some of us actually know that we have a voice, but do we know how to use it? Is it going to be accepted? Have they been listening to us for the past few years? Should we use the voice? So that's really where it is.
Coming back to you then, Horace, we've heard the divergent views, particularly Sabrina saying, well, young people aren't really listened to. I hear Dr. Ivy, I feel to myself, though, that it's a little bit theoretical, because is it really true that the ordinary citizen, besides when the election time come and him get the vote, that he has really a voice? Because at the end of the day, does anybody really listen though? He says the squeakiest wheel gets the grease, but in Jamaica, in your experience, is this really true?
No, not true, really. They're not being heard, or they're not being listened to, or they're not, if they're heard and listened to, they're not acting on the basis of what the speaker is trying to get them to do. The thing is that, you see, when democracy started off, it was representative democracy.
Mm-hmm.
You elected a few people to speak for you, because many of those who were speaking were uneducated, didn't know what the law was, and so on and so forth. Times have changed. People are much more educated now. They know more. They can Google things and find out a lot of things. So we've moved from a purely representative democracy to a more participatory democracy, one in which people say, yes, you're supposed to speak for me, but now I want to also speak for myself. And there are bodies that have grown up, you know, NGOs, civil society organizations, that also, you know, I trust them, that they have nothing to gain, and many of them, most of them, and they're speaking for me too, right? So you got to listen to me, man. And just because you've been elected to speak on my behalf doesn't mean that it's you alone who can speak. And very often you're held back by the fact that you're not just speaking for me, you're speaking for your party as well. And you have to adhere to what the party is saying, right? And you're held back by the bureaucracy. And sometimes you're held back by corruption inside the party and in the government and so on. So there are various blocks to your speaking on my behalf. That's why I need to speak for myself more and have some other organizations, and why there have to be some structures put in place to have this participatory democracy. We haven't got those structures in place as yet to make it more participatory.
So if we're thinking about how we want to build out this new republic that we are thinking of crafting, I hear you saying that we're moving from just mere representative democracy to a participatory democracy, where we no longer are just hung by the shackles of special interest groups that would give an investment into the politician, but you're now saying that individuals, the interest of individuals will become paramount. To you then, Dr. Ivy, when you think about where we're coming from, this representative democracy to where we want to go, which is a participatory democracy, What are the options? How do we speak? Because you see, you have to help me here. I grew up on Barbara Bludon. I know about Multi Perkins. We have whole heap of talk shows. We talk a lot. We tell you what is wrong. But I don't think there are structures, as Horace Levy has pointed out, that is in place that will force those who have power to listen. Help us with that. What options could we explore?
Yes, so one starts from the theoretical standpoint of what the democracy is on the role of the citizen and so forth. So what structures, what ways and means by citizens to be able to fully participate in the process as we go forward for the next 60 years. And so I make the point that the matter of the empowerment of citizens and to build their awareness of their role and the different ways by which they can participate. It has been said that unity is coalesce power, putting everything together and working in tandem. And so what we need to do as a society and as civil society and organizations such as JAMP and those the Advocates Network, we have to embark on a process of citizen education. And I remove that from this, we need to introduce civics in school. That's not where I'm going. I'm talking about citizenship education so that the average citizen, to which I alluded to earlier, is aware, is empowered to understand that we need to flip the script. We have a situation now where the citizens who ought to be the bosses are not treated like the bosses. So we need for the average citizen to understand that they must make demands on their political representatives using the various modalities that exist now. There are all kinds of different communication modalities, whether it is face-to-face, whether it is by electronic means or otherwise. Know your political representative, get in touch with your political representative. There's a matter in Parliament being debated. Does the average citizen contact their politician and say, what position are you adopting on this? I want you to take this particular perspective and so forth. All the different ways and means of citizen participation are to be brought forward and made available to and into citizens to be so informed.
You've said so much. I want us to break it down though. When you talked about empowerment of the people, you kind of threw some shade on this civics idea. I want us to be clear on that, because I think in order for us to be empowered, in order for us to know our role as citizens, in order for us to understand who we are as the real bosses in a democracy, civics is important. And it is through civics that you actually become, you get the introduction to your role as a citizen. If you don't have that introduction, the big books can't help us. Horace, do you agree? Besides empowerment, would we do more and do much better in knowing that we're the real bosses of the people if there was a greater emphasis on our education through civics focus?
Could I quickly clarify before Horace come in? Just to say that I just wanted to rephrase the terminology because, the thing was kind of well used. So I just want to repackage it in citizen education.
I appreciate that one, because when you said it earlier, I got the impression that you're kind of throwing some shade on it and it was distinct from that which you were saying. And so my question to you still stands, Horace, because when we talk about the empowerment of citizens, and your book is actually one of those things that point out that we, as I think it's Patricia McDonald, who has said it just now, reminding us that you have said that we as a citizen, we are grossly misinformed.
Yeah, no, I agree with Paul that there are various modalities that citizens need to use to get through to their representatives, and I agree with him that they're not using them sufficiently to get their representatives to act on their behalf. And I entirely agree with him on that, right? And I agree with him that citizen education is critical, right, to get them to be aware. For example, that when the politician says, who are you to be, who are you talking for? How many people do you represent, right? The implication is that unless you're a politician and have votes behind you, that you have no voice. And that's completely wrong, right? That's the absolute opposite of exactly what Paul is saying, that we are citizens, we have rights to be speaking out. Right? We have a right to be speaking on our own behalf, right? And not just dependent on him or her, the representative, to speak on our behalf. So, but I mean, I was proposing that in addition to the modalities that Paul is talking about, which I agree are not sufficiently used, right? There are other things that need to be done. For example, I haven't researched it enough, but I think Scotland, the country there, has a chamber in which citizens, in particular, citizens organizations, have a voice alongside, or not in the sense of rivaling it, but of being consulted by it, the parliament of elected people. So it's something like that, some more structured involvement of those, perhaps a better use of the Senate and who is appointed to the Senate, right? So that ordinary people would have a better input into what the parliament, the lower chamber, is debating and deciding.
A clue that you just dropped, though, Horace, was a structured way of participating. So you've mentioned the role that the chambers in Scotland plays, but let's be a little bit more specific, because I think where we perhaps would need to go as we craft up where we want to go as a new republic is to have a framework which facilitates this kind of structure. So even if you're going to be calling your representative to say, where are you voting? Should there not be consequences to you not following through on what the majority of your constituents want? And I say that in the context of asking for things such as, should we consider the power of recall or impeachment? Should we? Go ahead, Hart.
No, I agree that that's definitely something that we need to consider, but we also, I think, need to define, because it hasn't been sufficiently done, what the representative's task is, right? To what extent does he speak for his constituents, as against the amount of speaking he should be doing in determining the laws for the whole country, right? So the relationship between how much he should be acting on behalf of his constituents compared to how much he should be acting on behalf of the whole country in the drafting of laws, right? The terms of appointment of the MPs have not been sufficiently defined and set down, and they don't know. And therefore, many of them spend their whole time representing their constituents and very little time actually committing to the legislation that they are appointed there to vote on and to act on. And that brings me really to the question not only of the right of recall of an MP, but the role of the Prime Minister, because presently the Prime Minister has tremendous power, excessive power, right? It's another issue which I don't want us to get sidetracked onto right now. I just want to mention that we need to get into it at some point to settle the extent to which he can determine what his MPs say and don't say, because he has the power of appointing them to ministerial positions, etc., etc. And he has excessive power in that regard.
So I think where you're coming from is then looking at the powers of the Prime Minister, looking at the responsibilities and the roles of the members of Parliament, and being able to quantify them so we can hold them responsible. Pulling you in, Sabrina, you've heard the use of modalities. I've thrown out the suggestion of the use of such an option as a recall. How do you think, or your voice in particular, could be strengthened as we think about fashioning a new way of governance for Jamaica?
Just including us, just coming to us and asking us, what do we think? It's as simple as that.
You already have the National Secondary Student Council, so one can argue that there are multiple means by which students can make their voices heard. We don't hear much from you. Is it because you don't care, or you're waiting on us to knock on the door and say, young people, what do you think?
No, I really think that the different organizations that we have, as you said before, is through representation. It doesn't necessarily have to do with an individual. We are not asked individually what's the problem. They ask for different representatives that would have been through an election or through whosoever the majority would have voted for. But then again, we have organizations, but are they strong enough? Can they hold the voices? We have good positions. Yes, we have the NSSC. Yes, we have the JPA. Yes, we have different youth organizations. But are these organizations strong enough to actually represent the young people? No, they're not, because we're seeing reoccurring issues every single year. We're hearing the same manifestos, but different terminologies being used. So What I think they should do is legit go and ask people that are not a part of these organizations. Because then again, you have to have a certain grade in high school to be an NSSC member. You have to be of a certain status. We want the actual young person, normal, ordinary, no accolades, no badges, somebody that can talk, somebody to come to us as young people and just ask, you know, what's going on? Or even if those persons are the ones that are talking, listen. Because if you're not from NSSC, they won't listen to you. If you're not from an organization, would they actually listen?
Dr. Ivy, how do we cure that? Because what she's identifying is that the voice that is least listened to in our democracy is that of the youth. She's suggesting that we look more towards the youth and get their involvement in the process of our democracy and governance. Is that something that is possible, and how could that be included?
I agree with the points made by Horace in relation to structure serving strategy. So the various structural elements that he mentioned that needs to be put in place to strengthen our democracy. As it relates to the inclusion of the youth, I often recall back in the day when there was a degree of, shall I call it, militancy on the part of youth in the different tertiary institutions. It's almost as if that is all gone, you know, with the Walter Rodney's banning from Jamaica and how the youths came out in relation to that. There was a time when there were adjustments in tuition fees and the youth would come. What has happened to the youth? And I believe that the different technologies that the youth are so adept at, they should use those technologies for strategic use of social media, if you will, or strategic use of modern technologies. So the different organizations that exist, such as those that Sabrina alluded to, they should see themselves. I remember being on a panel and there were a number of youth there. And I thought I would do a thought experiment, well, an experiment of thought. And I said to each of them, which one of you have political aspirations in terms of in the future looking towards that direction? And they were in the minority who indicated that they have an interest in national affairs and so forth. So the question of the sensitization and the mobilization of the youth, so that the different organizations that they have that are already in existence, for them to take an interest in national affairs. I've observed that the office of the political ombudsman as a youth arm, where it is trying to encourage youth participation. I'm also happy to see that the NIA is going into the schools with its its youth arm. And those are the kinds of things that over time should gather some momentum, and the youth should gravitate towards those type of things. But the thing about it, it is we, the adults, who must encourage the youth along these pathways.
You know, when you talk about encouraging, and you've raised that note about interest in national affairs, you've also made that point elsewhere about apathy. The fact that many of us don't go out to vote anymore. We're no longer interested as adults in the process. Here is my suggestion, and I want to know whether or not it's feasible. As we craft out our new role for governance, do you think we could get more involvement in national interest if we were to have more, perhaps use more petitions? You know, in some states, in some jurisdictions, you put out items for the people to vote on to determine if it is that they're interested in it. So if we go to the north, we now have this conversation about abortion, and there are states who have it out on a ballot now and says, let us hear from the people. What do you think we should be doing? This now would allow over 18 people. We could even think about looking at lowering the age for the contribution to petition if it is to be 16, but we'd get more people involved in decision making so they feel more a part of the system. Do you think using more means such as petitions would be something that we could include in this new mode of governance? Dr. Ivy or Horace?
Yes, certainly. Certainly, I do believe that. Because you see, what we are seeing here is that we can't keep doing the same things that we have always been doing, or else we will get what we have always got. So the different modalities and the different suggestions that are being made are welcome and they are meritorious. But I want to say this. I'm also someone who is enamored of Garvey and Garvey's philosophies. And the point is this.
For Garvey.
Yes, indeed. I have a Garvey book coming out soon. Garvey's point of departure for his project of racial pride and empowerment of Black people was consciousness raising. And I think it is important for us to appreciate that as a point of departure. If we're going to get the population to think differently, to act differently in relation to participating in our democracy, we must first start with raising their consciousness as to what it means to be a citizen in a democratic society and what the roles and responsibilities are. You might say it a little bit theoretical, but that's where we need to start. And when we start there, we go to the ways and means of participating. What are the different things that they can actually do? I remember the late Martin Henry set out in one of his articles a bulleted list of the different ways that citizens can participate and are not participating. He mentions, for example, starting with green papers or white papers. When they come out in the parliament for discussion on particular matters, how many persons participate? So we should encourage the different groups, just like how the JTC bill is in the Joint Select Committee, and different stakeholder groups went in and made their presentations. What we need to get to a place where ordinarily the default state of affairs is that when these things are up for discussion, regular citizens, particular groups, because groupings and unity gives you greater power and so forth, different representative groups make their submissions and all of these kinds of things. Or are we using the Access to Information Act, for example, and the public education around that as a case in point? And another example.
But we're talking about putting in a structure. So I want to bring you in, Horace, because remember where we're going. We want to be able to not just have an idea and talk a lot, but to also put forward things that would include the point made by Sabrina. So I threw to Dr. Ivy, including in our new structure, this whole notion of having petitions going to the people to have them, rather than expecting them to go into Parliament, they would be able to vote upon these petitions utilizing whatever site or whatever means that we're thinking of so that they become more inclusive in government. Do you think that is something that we should be thinking about, Horace?
Yeah, I fully concur on that. And I give you the example of the one that the Jamaican Environment Trust sponsored a couple of years back to do with Cockpit Country, in which they were able to get over 30,000 signatures. They only need 15. And they got over 30 in the space of a few weeks, and were able to put forward this petition and so on. So a petition like that can be highly influential and successful. There's no question about it. But I mean, there are 2 points that I want to throw in. One is, it's a question that's coming through to us. How do we raise this consciousness that Paul is talking about? Right? How do we raise it is one question. And the other question, I'm supposed to be answering these questions, I suppose, but I'm throwing that one at Paul. The other
throw
one,
that one back to Paul, since he is the author.
I am throwing it back to Paul.
The idea.
And the other question is, how do we pose petitions and other things that not just are listened to or heard or listened to, but on which there is action? In the case of that particular jet petition, yes, there was some action that followed. But
right.
In many other things, we make requests, we put things through to our MPs and all the rest, and they listen. Oh yes, they listen, but nothing results.
So that means
what are the levers that we can use to really compel some action from them? Because as citizens, we have the right to say to them, look, you must do this.
That's exactly where I want you to go, because I am thinking that in this new era where we're crafting what we'd like, in addition to using, because let's assume for all intents and purposes, Dr. Ivy, our consciousness is, we're now awoke people, to use that chronology. We're now awoke. Yes. And we want to be a part of this process. We now want to use things a structured way, such as a petition, to include our young people and to include interest groups. Shouldn't the new constitution that is for the Republic include a mandatory requirement that this be included and this is the consequence. This is how you go forth utilizing the information coming from the petition. Wouldn't that be something that would reflect strengthening the voice of our people?
I cannot disagree with that. And it is the case that now that we have a new Ministry of Legal and Constitutional Affairs, we should, and the different groups led by, for example, the Advocates Network that is very active, should insist on that ministry coming to us. We should insist, coming to us and setting out the way forward. What are the new considerations? It's like you're doing the framework. What are the new considerations that are going to inform the way forward as it relates to our new constitutional arrangements with a non-monarchical type of government? We should have the framework and we should have the opportunity to discuss it and have input into the form and substance of same.
Coming to you, Sabrina, because I'm trying as we go along in this conversation to write, how do we input the structures in our new constitution to ensure that our leaders are compelled, whether it is by saying they're mandatory decisions that can be done by way of a petition, and you have to listen to us by doing that. It's the very same thing with using a referendum. Would you think that we could use that more so that we can get your voice heard much more?
Before we even consider using that, what we should do first is actually to reassure the young people that somebody is listening, because we would have had different elections and heard the empty promises, and then, our next election and those promises not fulfilled. So the trust of the people, it's not there, it's non-existent. The people don't trust the government. So how are we going to even talk to them in the first place? We're going to talk about the young people not stepping up or not being interested into politics. But why would you pose an interest into politics where you don't see any action? You don't see anything being done. Why would you want to represent? Why would you want to speak up? Why would you want to be the voice if there's nothing that's going to happen? Because for years you would have been seeing that nothing is being happened. So first we should have that reassurance to say that yes, we're listening, and yes, we'll act, and yes, something will be done before we even sign a petition, because the whole reason behind signing something is that something is going to be done after that. And nothing has been done for the past few years, which would result in the young people not being interested. You hear about
Sabrina, I hear your point. I take your point that you're not listening to it. I take the point that you want reassurance, but this is where we're going. We want to put in these structures that would facilitate people listening to us, as Horace has consistently said.
Structures.
Correct. That also provides compelling them to listen. And so what we want to be able to iron out, because we don't want to just be a talk shop. We want to iron out mechanisms that can be used and be able to formulate these ideas and say, if you are going to be using this to listen to us, then by way of using that and putting in the structure and putting in something that forces you to listen, then you get the reassurance. So
yes, but I feel like we will get the reassurance, but then again, is the reassurance going to be picked up by everybody? Because we will see this and say, oh, it's just another gimmick, it's just another thing that they're going to come with, because that's the reality. Some persons hear about Jamaica being a republic and say, oh, when we see it, I believe it. And that's how the young people see things. We need that reassurance first before we say that we're going to create that framework, because we need to regain the trust of governments or representatives before we can actually say we're going to do something that is towards a certain purpose.
In other words, this conversation about having the republic and changing or improving governance is moot if it is that we don't get the trust of the young people in the process.
Right.
Yeah. And I think Sabrina has hit a very key point there. Very key point. And it seems to me the reassurance that we can give to the youth and give to anybody, give to the whole population, that this particular way of acting will bring some response. One of the ways, or a chief way, is to build it into the Constitution. Is to change the Constitution around it. In other words, for example, around the power of the Prime Minister or the recall of the MPs. Right? If that is entrenched or put into the Constitution, I avoid the word entrenched, but put into the Constitution, that gives some assurance to people like Sabrina and the young people. Oh yes, because they've got to do something now because it's right there, and we're going to make sure.
Right.
Is that it, Sabrina?
Right. Exactly that. If it's there, then we have evidence. We have something to speak on. They can't tell us to stop talking because it's legit there.
Nobody have no faith.
We now got to ease up because it's there. It's legit there. We will act. Then you'll see more persons coming out. Then you'll see more young people being interested in politics and in national affairs, because guess what? There's something there that tells them that they can do that.
So we're going to change the Constitution in certain key respects. Those would give the structures I'm talking about, to ensure a more representative democracy. Here, a more
participatory democracy.
More participatory. Sorry for that mistake. Yes. Well, that's the idea. Correct. And that's the direction I think in which we need to move, right, and rapidly, and without delay. To get things done that will build the trust. The lack of trust is what is holding this whole country back, and I mean there's good grounds for the lack of trust. So to rebuild the trust is to remove. In order to rebuild the trust, we have to remove some of these grounds that have allowed MPs and others, the politicians and the ruling elite, to simply skirt around the demands and the needs of especially the poorer population and so on, and ignore them.
I feel, Horace, listening to you, sir, and Sabrina and Dr. Ivy, that this conversation about how to strengthen our voices flows right back into how do you rebuild the trust in our government?
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And in rebuilding the trust in the government, it also means, to borrow the term used by Dr. Ivy, our consciousness, elevating, empowering us into believing that we have power as citizens. And in the absence of that, there is no point in having a conversation about renewing or reworking our constitution.
Perhaps because I'm an academic, I have to put things in a particular way, because I'm saying that the rebuilding of the trust and the particular analogy that was used in terms of citizen participation and the appreciation of citizens of their role. I remember the late Tony Lang used the analogy of a company with shareholders who have left up the company to the management without playing their roles of shareholders. Shareholders will go to annual general meetings, AGMs, and they will hold the management of a company accountable. Tony Lang said that we, the citizens of Jamaica, left it up. That's the construction that he used. We left it up. And so we see it reflected in the apathy, where in the last election, 37.2% of the voters came out to vote and so forth. So I go back to the structures now. In the new constitution that we're going to formulate, there are some things that have been floating around for several years. Horace made mention of one or two of them earlier, and I'm going to nail them down now so that we're saying that at least these three concrete things and other things must appear in a new Jamaican constitution.
And to be clear, Dr. Ivy, these three things that you're highlighting would be things that would serve to strengthen our voice as a people in the new republic.
Impeachment, yes, impeachment of public officials. I recall that after a particular, that stool incident, that bill was put back on the House and it's probably has fallen off the order paper. It does not
fell off the stool. It fell off the stool. It's no longer important. Impeachment.
2, recall in the Constitution. And the third thing, term limits. Term limits. It has been put into manifestos, and as soon as they get into office, they forget about it. I recall, it was said that within the first 100 days, these are the things that will happen and so forth. Well, we are past we're at about the 300th days and so forth. So these three things that I'm mentioning, I'm also putting it forward to say that, look, we should have a situation where political representatives are required to have town halls a new matter has come up for discussion, they must come to the people in town hall meetings type settings and have their discussion, any laws that are being proposed and so forth. And this matter of private members' motion, we don't see many private members' motions being tabled in the House and so forth.
So I want to tie those two things in. Hold a second, Dr. Ivy, before we go on, because you've given us four impeachment, recall, term limits, and you're at town halls and you're tying in private members' motions. But wouldn't we need to have some kind of consequence though? So that when you come to the town hall and the majority of the people say that this is what we want and you do something else, that there is some consequence for failing to follow the will of the people?
But you know what the consequence is? It has been said that elections are sanctioned in devices. They're sanctioned in devices where you actually hold people accountable by in the virtue of elections. But when you look at the level of apathy, isn't that where we see the civic negligence coming in, where citizens have abdicated their responsibilities, and hence my earlier point about consciousness raising, so that persons appreciate that the government that you get is the government that you basically elect. And persons need to also appreciate there's this little construct that goes like this. It is so profound and deceptively simple, but yet profound. Elections have consequences. I don't know if the average person—
Did you just say, Dr. Ivy, that we get the government we deserve? Is that what I heard you say?
Yes.
And we get the government we deserve because we refuse to act as citizens in the—
As per Tony Lang, we left it up.
Aye.
But look, there's another aspect to this thing. And that is, you know, that the governments, the administrations, I'm not just talking about this one, but all of them, tend to listen to more than, and the polls are showing it, to big business, you know, to big business, and to those who contribute to their campaigns, right? Who are from big business, more than they will listen to the opposition, or certainly civil society is way down at the bottom of the list, right? So, you know, if that's the case, how do we change that is the question, right? How do we change that from being civil society being marginalized in who the government is listening, the government's administrations are listening to occupy a more central position. Well, I mean, I think putting in place the structures, constitutional structures, is one way. Is a crucial way, critical way. But there's more that's needed. I mean, to make those structures—
More like what?
Well, to make them effective, you know, citizens have to be following up on it and putting pressures on their representatives, for one thing, along with using the various channels that Paul had pointed out earlier on, and by the kind of organizational representation, organizational size that especially young people can mobilize and bring to bear, and show that, you know, we have numbers too. You know, it's not just UNO who have the vote and so on, who can call forth numbers. But I don't know. I think there's something missing still. I can't quite put my finger on it at the moment. But maybe somebody else can help. Yeah,
sure, Sabrina, help us here.
If I may interject, Dr. Ivy would have said something about we get the government that we deserve, and there's some negligence. But let us remember, we only have two parties. You're either green or orange. And if green is ineffective this year, then we'll have to go work with orange, put a little hope in there. And if orange is ineffective for the next term that we have election, then we'll put a little hope in the green. And that's the cycle that we've been using for years. We've been having the 18 years of the orange, and then, you know, we'll come back with the GLP. So that is the trust that I'm talking about, because we have that empty promises coming down for years. What are the Jamaican people supposed to do when you only have two parties that, when in power, don't do anything, you know, but the opposition sees everything quite clearly? Yeah, man, the opposition pick out every single problem. But when you know, they come in term, when the opposition actually becomes the government, then the other opposition sees everything that's wrong. So Jamaican people won't be included. Of course, they will neglect the system because guess what? They're getting to understand the intentions of the system. It's not to care about how they feel. It's to know that they have a seat for the next election. It's to know that they have power over us for the next election. And that's what the two parties have been doing. They've been fighting for that position.
So Sabrina, having said that and putting that into context for us, how do we change that going forward? We're celebrating 60 years shortly. We're looking at saying we want to be able to rebrand how we govern ourselves. This is what this is about. This is why Dr. Ivy has pointed out some things that we must have in our constitution, and why Horace Levy is saying these are things that we need to focus on. What are you putting on the table?
To question the feasibility of that political divide, to question the feasibility of having these two parties for 60 years, basically, what have they been doing? If we are going to vote.
So hold on. So you're questioning the feasibility of these two parties. Are you suggesting that we look at how it is persons become part of the government, or how it is that they're elected? So you don't have to be part of a party to be elected. Is that what you're saying? To do away with the party
system? Don't really have a voice. But Jamaican people,
interesting.
Do we have a voice if we're not green or orange? You don't really have a voice if you're not green or orange.
I want to hear Horace. I see Horace pointing to me. That's an interesting thing, because I don't think many of us would have said in a republic, we want not to have or to be limited by a two-party system. We want to have a system that is open for any Jamaican from any walk of life to be part of government. Horace, what do you say to that?
Well, looking at the history of this thing, there have been many attempts to form a third party, many attempts, right? The very first one was when it was announced that we were going to have our first election, and the business class tried to start a party. They were wiped out, right? And they found their home actually in the Labour Party, paradoxically. And there have been other attempts, right? The communists and so on. And it didn't work, right? So it's very hard. The two-party thing is entrenched here. Very difficult to start a third party.
Can we get rid of them in the new republic, Horace?
Can we get rid of them?
Sorry, Sabrina. Horace, what I'm thinking of, just to piggyback on what Sabrina has said, would it be necessary to get more participation, or to improve participation, to think about opening the gates of government to not just a party system?
Right.
Well, that's precisely where civil society comes in. Seems to me that if we're just going to rely on the excuse me on the parties, we're going to be in trouble, because the history of the last excuse me, the last 60 years is that the parties have done some good things and they've done some very bad things. And the upshot of the whole thing is that we're stagnating right now. The country is, as it were, stalled. People are frustrated at the way we move so slowly. That things, look at the abortion issue, started in the 70s and still on the table. Look at so many other issues that have been just dragged on for years before some final decision is taken. Just on traffic, it's taken 12 years to come to a piece of legislation about it, and so on. And there are many other things like that, right? This frustration is there. And part of the cause of the frustration is important to understand, right? The frustration comes about because there are two currents in Jamaica. One which is on top and keeping things in place and holding it the way it is. Another one which is rebelling against it and trying to get some justice and some change all the time. And those two are head on. And so we're not moving as a result of this, right? There are profound divisions in our society. So we can't look to the two parties to move us forward. I think in my view is that we have to look to civil society. Not that it's not a matter of trying to do it by itself without the party. It's a matter of working with the parties, trying to persuade the parties, for example, that there is some common ground between them that they have to settle on, so that we can move forward on certain issues, economic issues, crime issues, and so on. And so civil society can work along with the politicians if the politicians will allow them. Now,
But
they're not going to allow them just so. Civil society has to press, to urge, and to compel the politicians to allow them in.
Besides those two groups, though, Horace, because I'm really intrigued by Sabrina's suggestion. Dr. Ivy, in reworking our new constitution, because our current constitution gives favor to a two-party system. It speaks about the composition of the opposition and the government. And there's not much, and we can happen to the recent past where we don't even know how to treat independent members properly and the role, the power that they would have or ought to have in the constitution. Are we at a point where we should actually be discussing, not just saying that the prime minister opposition leader has to be head of a political party? Could it be that we're opening up the system now to many different persons being able to become members or leaders of a government?
Well,
is that something we should give thought to?
As it relates to the legal perspective, as far as that is concerned, and the constitutional scholars, I've heard it said that the current constitution does not recognize political parties. So I'm not sure if one can write into a constitution the political parties and make mention of them per se.
Well, I did say favored. So if you notice the term, I said it favors a two-party system.
Yes.
And so having that favor being granted, that we become more explicit in how it is that individuals not being part of any recognized institution or party can become part of it. So we simplify the language and facilitate that kind of leadership.
Yes, that may be helpful. But where I want to go with this, to Sabrina's point about the revolving door of the two major political parties over the years, and it is pointing to civic negligence, where we are swapping each party and alternating them after a while and getting more of the same. It points to the laxity on the part of citizens to allow A to get away with all these things, come back to B, B gets away with all these things, you go back to A, which has gotten away with all those things in the previous dispensation and so forth. It is the citizens who are causing that to happen. And I'm going to this point now to say, both major political parties are down to their bases as it relates to level of support. So what do you find? That large proportion of, let's call them for this purpose, the uncommitted. It is that large uncommitted block of Jamaican citizens who are allowing what's happening to be continued to happen. And so we come to what is almost as kind of species of learned helplessness, where persons are saying, well, no one no better than the other, therefore. And so they stand on the margins and allow these things to be happening with this element of learned helplessness. And I think what would be helpful as well, for us to reiterate some of the successes that have occurred from citizen action in Jamaica, so that persons can draw from them as examples of when people speak, governments are obliged to listen. Let us start with just the matter of the festival song competition. They said there wasn't going to be one, and the citizens said we want one, and there was one. Horace alluded to the petition for the cockpit mining. You recall there was this notion, well, I think a minister got up in Parliament and announced that there was a decision to extend the time for release of cabinet documents for up to 70 years. And public said, no, absolutely not. We'll all be dead by then. And that proposal died on the vine, died on arrival. We had the resignation of former Prime Minister Bruce Golding on account of public outcry. The appointment of the Chief Justice in an acting capacity. The people said, we'll have none of it. The point I'm making, these examples go to show that when the people speak in unison, it is recognized because it is the power of the many. The power of the people is greater than the power of those in power.
So where we are then, Dr. Ivy, is that you're reminding us that we do have a voice, that collectively, once we use the voice, we do have some amount, we have power, we can change. There is the opportunity to change because there's power in being a citizen. But as we look forward, because we have to wrap up just now, as we look forward to this new Jamaica, we're talking about increasing participation and securing that participation. How do we change this large block of learned helplessness so that we can have a stronger voice?
I wanted to, if I'm sorry.
Sure, go ahead, Horace.
No, I wanted to come in on the point you were talking about, changing the leadership of the parties, to point out that the Senate offers an opportunity for putting in citizens who are independent. And it's been used in part, in small measure, in the past. So that if the constitution were changed to change the way the structure of the Senate is set up, the number of from the independent side, both from business but also from civil society and so on, as opposed to the political side, we could get some things done that way quite effectively without going to the extreme of trying to change the leadership of the political parties. So, the Senate, the constitutional changes of the Senate offers an opportunity for changing that, for getting the voices of civil society into, it's another structure, but getting the voice of civil society into government. That's the point I wanted to make. Now,
So
you were asking,
that would come back then, Horace, to adding one of the other structures, looking at the makeup of the Senate to ensure that it's as independent as it can be.
yes.
All
Now,
right.
you were, yeah.
Yes, because we're about to round out. So I wanted to look more specifically now at this solution, because what Dr. Ivy has pointed us in the direction of is saying, look, you have a voice, your voice strong. When you talk and you call out, things get done. But there's a large block of us who don't understand how powerful we are. And he's described that as learned helplessness. Dr. Ivy, we want to be able to strengthen our voice since we do have one and the voice of the citizen is powerful. How do we bring more voices to the table?
Daniel, colleagues, friends, I'm going to go back to where I started.
We come right back to the beginning.
Yes, first principles. In a democracy, the citizen is at the center. It's like a cell where you have the nucleus. The citizen is at the center. Where we need to go forward is that we need to raise the consciousness of that large block of non-committed persons so that they appreciate that the new Jamaica that we want to see is incumbent on them coming from the margins and into the center to participate and being the bosses to give instructions to the political directorate. I've cited examples where change has occurred by virtue of citizen action. It is the citizen that has to create the new Jamaica.
We are as loud as we speak, you say?
Yes.
As loud as we shout, and we do have that power, but we just need to be able to use it more.
We need persons to know that they have the power, and I'm challenging the civil society to embark on that dimension of things. That's where Garvey started, consciousness raising, and I've seen it to good effect. That first you start with the mindset. It is the headspace that you have to reorient for persons to be thinking differently. When persons think differently, they act differently.
And that is why you started us looking at how we re-envision looking at civics, looking at it as more consciousness and an empowerment of ourselves as citizens.
And citizen education.
Citizen education. Sabrina, you've heard Dr. Ivy, you've heard Horace. We are at the cusp where we want to bring more voices, bring you in from the margins. Final words, what would we do to strengthen your voice?
What we do to strengthen our voice is to remove that saying, the children are the future. We are not. We are the now, we are the present, we're the current. We can do something now. We might not have the experience as or the dear Dr. Ivy and Mr. Horace Levy. We might not see the happenings. We might not be around when those things happen, but we still have a voice. We still can act. We still can we can influence, we can persuade, we can get persons to act. Because when we act, when we see the need, when we as the young people actually be a part of it, then the old foot them maga say then, if Sabrina is a part of it, then I can join too. They're going to say that if young people are involved, then I can be a part of it too. So it's not about, saying, them sue call me, sue them time. We are not the future. Erase it. It's not a saying. It should not be said.
So you bring you in now. Bring you in the know.
We're the
Let's be part of
present.
it.
Yes, let us know what we should say. If we don't know what to say, help us to say. We are the current.
Gotcha.
We're the present. We're the now.
Gotcha.
We're not the
Gotcha.
future. We need to know
Alright.
what to do now. So yes, that is what we should do. Allow them to know that.
I think that's a call that must be listened to, and I'm sure as our youth advocate, you are certainly going to make us remember.
Yes,
we should be brought to the table. Horace, just before we go out and take some questions from our listeners and our audience.
No, I just want to endorse what Sabrina has been saying. I don't have much else to offer.
Mr. Horace endorses you, sir. You don't need anything more than that.
Don't need anything more.
Thank you so much. It has been a riveting exchange. Lots of ideas on the table. It does tell us that when we talk about making Jamaica better, that we can do much more by having conversations like this on our veranda. We're using Zoom. So we learn now that we don't have to just sit on outside. We can bring in a group of people digitally and have a conversation and use the modalities that Horace and Dr. Ivy spoke about, so that our leaders listen to us, and they're compelled to do so because we do have a voice. The question is, are we speaking loud enough? And we want to make sure that going forward, we have the structures in place that secures that voice in more ways than we're currently using. Thank you so very much. Dwayne, I'm gonna lean on you just now so that we can get some questions from our audience. We have our listeners, we have persons listening and them driving. I hope you're being very careful, but I know you're on YouTube listening and you're watching by Zoom. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your company this cool afternoon right here in Jamaica. Are there any questions? We're running some polls, so you will see that popping up on your screen, some questions that we've thrown out, and you will see the response to those polls, inspiring us to have other discussions, and we can use that to shape the suggestions that we will make to government in terms of what it is that we want to see in this new document. You remember when Jeanette started out, she started to share with us what the Constitution looked like, that big book. We want to perhaps simplify it and make it an improved or new age Constitution that reflects our desires, aspirations, and how it is that we want to go about doing business. So you're up showing us these results now, Dwayne. Thank you so very much. What do you think is the most important way the voice of the people should be strengthened? And we're coming with the poll from you, our participants. Wow, did you see that? More of us want to see, use of a referendum for major decisions, which makes sense, which comes back to you, Sabrina, wanting to be more part of the process. So you see that, Horace, see that, Paul? We are looking at using a referendum, which is more inclusive than simply being in Parliament making decisions. Looking at the involvement of the people, back to you, Paul Ivy, the town hall meetings, definitely something people want to see more of, and impeachment being right there in that word cloud. Looking at consequences of not following your instructions, because we are the people, we are the bosses. And so our elected representatives and our elected officials should be responding to us.
And the involvement, it is there. That's the first thing I saw, actually.
Yes. And you see consultation right there as well, the consultation issues, talking to us about the budget. So people seem to want to be consulted on the budget. Interesting. Anything else coming out?
The involvement is indicating that the citizen is going to get up off their laurels and participate in the process, So that involvement.
I appreciate Dr. Ivy, because what you're doing is you're volley right back to the people and say, well, if you want better government, you get up and be part of a government system. You come out and participate, come out and vote, stop clinging to the margins. So you're blaming us, the citizens, for where we are. That's what you're saying.
I'm ascribing responsibility, because remember now, in the democracy, the office of citizen, by virtue of being there, you have responsibility. It goes with the territory.
Yes, yes. We'll take a question from you, Patricia. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining. You have been our earliest participant here.
No, I was just
Patricia.
going to tell her.
Yes, thank you so much. Wow, so exciting. My question is, how do we keep us who have been making our voice heard from getting hoarse? How we stop the burnout? While we're trying
Dr. Ivy?
Yes, I'm eager to take that question because I put that question to Martin Henry once. I said, Martin, you have been writing articles in the Gleaner for over 30 years now. You're not tired. I mean, what has happened? Martin turned to me and he said, when you are breaking rocks, it is not the final blow that shatters the rock, but it is all the cumulative effect of the preceding blows that preceded the penultimate blow or the final blow.
So what you tell our Dr. Ivy, drink some water and keep talking?
Keep at it because you don't know which one of the blows is going to shatter the rocks. And it has been said that water is a very patient enemy.
See? So continue speaking. So and that's important, Dr. Ivy, because you've made a point fearlessly that many of us are on the margins. We can't bother, we give up. But there still are a few, like Horace, who has never let up. And him cuss everybody left, right, and center, and still tell you said this is what it is about. So Horace, encourage our persons or citizens who are talking like Patricia, who they're there, but it's not getting anywhere. And a young person like Sabrina just feels it's like a revolving door.
It's not. I mean, I've lived long enough to see some real improvements. They're incremental. It takes time. But I mean, 60 years ago, civil society didn't have the voice it has today. Civil society has moved from the margins to near to the center and is having a voice now it never had before. So it takes time. Even the police have changed, right? From what they were in the 70s, right? Where there's oversight bodies now that keep them in their place and make sure that if they violate the law, they pay the consequences. Never had that 30, 40 years ago. So it takes time, right? You can't give up, right? I agree with the things that Paul was saying and the source he was quoting, Martin and so on. So that it really, you just have to keep trying, keep pushing.
Just to quickly interject, this is a long game, and it is to be appreciated that this advocacy and these kind of things, they are long games. And so what persons like Horace can do and so on, and I'm post-independence born, should I say, just 9 months in, and that we run our leg of the relay. We run our leg of the relay and we pass the baton to persons like Sabrina and Danielle and others, and they keep it going. So what we do is that we set up this virtuous cycle and it continues. It's like evolution. The earth wasn't formed just overnight. So all these will take time. It's a long game.
I think where we are, and because we want to make sure that we sign out and wrap out on an element of hope, is that we've had gains, and we've had gains coming from the continuous shouting, screaming, whispering of our citizens from all walks of life throughout the course of our lifetime, and even before independence. So we are grateful for that. And so where we want to go, you want to look at the future, and you want to see how we can make it any better. So I think putting this conversation into context, that's really what we want to do. We don't want to throw cold water on the things that we've achieved. We simply want to say, how can we improve it much more than it is? How can we improve our existence? I think there's a question is this from Charles? How does accountability get measured today, and how will it change in the new Jamaica? Horace, Sabrina, Paul, any one of you like to take that question?
Can you repeat it again? How does
accountability get measured today, and how will it change in the new Jamaica?
Well, I can start by making reference to to JAMP, the Jamaica Accountability Meter portal, where they actually have a graphic that shows the different parameters and where we are on them and so on and so forth. So that's a case in point. And it's an example of civil society coming to the fore and using a mechanism to ensure that accountability takes place and so forth. And we must get away from this. I had a construct for it, but it has eluded me now. This 9-day wonder, things come out, Auditor General's report and so on and so forth, and they become a 9-day talk, and then we forget about them and we move on. I mean, we really have to do things different. And I salute JAMP and other civil society organizations. I mean, we talk about persons like Flo O'Connor. Who remember Flo O'Connor? Flo O'Connor used to be a lone voice. Until we have now an organization called JFJ and so on and so forth. So we see we have made gains, and we must celebrate those successes and use them to show people that difference can occur from advocacy.
Got you.
And engagement and involvement.
But when you talk about involvement, one of the things that Horace has made great pains to remind us about is the civil society. And we have a comment here. Vanna says it's unfortunate that civil society tends to be personalities led. Succession planning to ensure sustained gains is a must. That's her comment. Horace? I agree with her. You want to add to what she said?
You mean,
and I think where she's getting at is that we've had the benefit of civil societies who are driven by the personalities that start them. And then when they bow out, there is not much strength left behind in the civil societies because their driving force is no more.
No, it's not true. I mean, it's partially true, but I mean, on the whole, there are many organizations that have continued even after the driving. I mean, JFJ is still active today.
And that's gone through several executive directors in its
precisely. Yeah. And there are others as well which have. I mean, JET has a new director, Jamaican Environment Trust, which is but it's very active still. JET is. So I think the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations, have learned the lesson of succession planning. And so they try to ensure, or if the organization ceases to formally exist, like the Jamaica Civil Society Association, it continues as a network. And Karen Narcisse, who is the founder of that, along with Judy Wedderburn, continues to exercise a lot of influence and so on in civil society, and to be recognized for the strong force and eloquent force that she is in defense of civil society.
Does it matter, Horace, because we're on that, who is behind these civil societies? And I say that because I've heard some natter about, look at the people who are part of that civil society, look at the people who make up that one. Does it add weight? Does it take anything from them based on their composition?
It adds weight. It has added weight in the case of Jamaicans for Justice, because a lot of upper class people were involved in that. Upper and middle class people were involved in that, but they were able to link with poorer people in Grants Pen, with ordinary citizens, and to work ferociously hard for people whose rights have been trampled on. So the alliance there, to the point where JET was having annually raising money through an art exhibition. And that was being supported by the upper class very, very, very definitely, was providing funding for the, considerable funding for the work of Jamaicans for Justice. So it has added something. I mean, it was JFJ's intervention that triggered what led, in fact, to the founding and the starting of Indicom. Right, because they took up a cause that was raised with an overseas rights body and brought it back to Jamaica, and that forced the government to take some action. And then it was Bruce Golden who actually set the law in motion in 2010. So there's a lot to be said for that, but there are other NGOs that are simply like those representing gays and um, and women who are inclined in that direction as well. So and they are simply made up of the members of that
But there is
element.
value. There is value to who is behind the groups, and that adds strength to the entities. That adds it amplifies your voice, so to speak.
Absolutely, and they've been able to provide the overseas people behind these groups have been able to provide some of the funding which has enabled them to
Which
go
is
forward.
important, indeed.
But now I think the NGOs recognize the need to depend more on local funding and have made great strides in that direction as well.
That includes that perhaps facilitates greater inclusiveness, because now that we are we're contributing to the process, we feel that it's a means that we can use as a voice. We're contributing to it, so it becomes ours. We get to claim it more than when it's just from those overseas. Jeanette, over to you just before we answer your question.
Thank you. There's a question here from Joel, and if I may be so bold, just to point it to Dr. Ivy. He's asking, do we still teach civics in school? Are students taught strategic civic engagement in our modern era? And Doc, why I'm going to ask you to take that one for us is, for as long as I've been in advocacy, and it's just about 10 years, it was only in the recent 2 years of JAMP did it come home to me that we are the bosses. Did it come home to me that I am the employer? And the minute I got that in my psyche, there was a mindset shift. So for me to say that, for the length of time that I've been in advocacy, how much more so for the Jamaicans? How much has it come home to them? And what Joel is saying is is it the fact that civics and civic engagement is not really taught? Why it is that, as you said, Tony said, we just left them up after we hired them?
Yes, and just to preface my response to say, speaking for myself, I'm not a member of any civil society group per se. I'm just a citizen doing my thing because I believe that I have a voice and I should use it, and looking on national affairs and so forth to comment, to write, to engage, just so on my own volition. What I've come to understand as it relates to civics in schools and so forth is that those of us of a certain age, we were taught civics. But I gather that it's more to do with social studies now, and you will find the matters to do with, the national eras, the national symbols, and those kind of things are in social study. And that's why, Daniel, I had mentioned at the onset that I'm not so much enamored of civics per se, but I wanted citizenship education.
How we do that?
How do you become a citizen? What are the roles and responsibilities of a citizen? What is the structure of government? How does a bill become law? And all the ways and in-betweens and so forth. The constitution that Jeanette brandished earlier, the contents of the constitution, what it means and the different contents thereof and the provisions and so on and so forth. The fundamental, the bill, right.
But Dr. Ivy, that is, I'm not in your age group, but we did get taught civics in schools by way of social studies.
Yes.
So through that program, we were able to learn all of the role of the citizen, how important the citizen was, the importance of voting, how a bill became law, what was the constitution of parliament, who was the prime minister. I say that to say that there is a generation who have been able to learn that information from social studies. So your quest for citizen empowerment or engagement may be asking for us to do more in terms of telling us how much more important it is to be nationalistic or patriotic. Just a question. Because I'm trying to iron out now.
Participatory. The matter of the participation.
So it's encouraging participation.
That's where is missing the ways and means of participating. How does the regular citizen participate in governance? Those are the missing elements. We have had this theoretical part of it, the this and the this and the this in terms of, okay, this is what's in the documentation and so forth. But you can do these various things. You can use the Access to Information Act And you can get information about something and you can do so and so. A green paper is being tabled. This is what you can do. A joint select committee has been established to look at a particular thing. These are the things that you can do.
So it's motivating us to be part of the process.
Yes,
Ambassador Ward says, I'm quite pleased to see this discussion taking place. I've called for civil society participation in several articles I've written in the Ward Post, and I've lamented the lack of citizen participation. There is hope for change. Keep the conversation going. So it's a fitting way that we can round this conversation out. We're going to keep hitting the rock. We're going to keep talking about it. And through the little avenues that we have, right, Sabrina? We're going to encourage greater participation amongst our peers and encourage citizens to be part of this process as we look forward to making a contribution to a new Jamaica.
And so not only participation, but consistency. Keep it going.
Keep it going.
You can always participate, but don't
excellent thing
fire alive, you know, ignite it. If it's out, ignite it again.
That's exactly what Dr. Ivy was saying when he says we should keep on hitting that rock, we keep on going, and we have, it's a team effort. It's not just an individual, but it takes all of us together working as a team, correct, to get to the goal. So thank you very much, Dr. Ivy. Horace Levy, thank you so very much. So very much. It's always a blessing to listen to you and to be able to share the same platform. And welcome, Sabrina. Your insight.
Thank you for having me.
Is beyond par, and we're grateful that you were able to take the time to contribute to this conversation. We keep it flowing right here via the Advocates Network. We continue to have these discussions, and over time we intend to bring them to your veranda. Wherever you are, we want to ignite that conversation and be consistent with sharing with you how you can participate and make Jamaica the place to live, the place to work, the place to just want to be. So I'm throwing this back to you, Jeanette. Thank you so much for waiting patiently. Or should I use it Jeanette? Or should I throw Rosalia? Is it Rosalia? Yes, it's Rosalia.
So wrapping up, thank you so much, moderator. You did an awesome job. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
And you know, yeah, let's give her a round of applause. And you know, this amazing intergenerational panel, you know, we had all the way many years. I won't age you, Horace. Many years retrospective perspective on what has happened over more than 60 years. And Dr. Ivy, of course, provided someone born in the throes of independence, and of course, young Sabrina. And many issues were raised. Who is listening, especially to these youth voices, but importantly, what are the structures that we need to strengthen the voice and to make sure that they're heard, and they're not just, if we want to listen, we listen, but they are really heard. And I think Horace made a point about the important role of the Constitution, that much of the changes we want, much of the reinforcement of our voice ought to be in a Constitution that we create, that can start with we, the people of Jamaica, want in order to achieve, and so on. So that, I think, is part of this conversation. We have to pay attention to discussion. Our Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs have told us that we're going down the road of comprehensive constitutional reform. And so these kinds of conversation is important, and we must make our voices heard. And we talked about strengthening, the discussion is about strengthening at least two broad ways we can identify. We can strengthen our representative democracy. We can think about how we restructure it. We talked, the Senate was mentioned, whether we continue to have an appointed Senate or an elected Senate. Those are ways in which we can have more of our voices heard if we elect senators. So that's the part of the conversation we need to have to strengthen oversight of the executive. Horace again raised the issue of the excessive power in the hands of the Prime Minister to, you know, appoint cabinet and, you know, fire people from the cabinet and so on, But powers that often, and we see perhaps too often, mute the voice of our representatives in Parliament. So even if their constituents wants a particular view, we tend not to hear it, because if it doesn't align with the party or with the cabinet's position, it's not heard. The mention of involvement in parliamentary committees, we saw that in the poll. It didn't come out in the discussions, but we saw in the poll. In fact, I think it was the second most popular way in which people think our voices should be heard. And we saw that strong response with respect to the referendum. But Dr. Ivy pointed to that three, what he saw as very important areas: impeachment, recall, term limits. Now, these are issues that we will go into much more detail in other forums. But here, whether through an impeachment process where citizens can in fact start this process of impeachment, or recall where your voice can directly reflect in the removal of an elected official. Those are new arrangements for us in Jamaica that we ought to consider. The discussions also include things like town hall meetings, private members' motions, all these, again, part of the strengthening of our representative democracy. With respect to direct citizens' participation, big part of this conversation, how do our voices get heard directly? Participatory budgeting is a conversation that we will have in a very specific way. And again, I think you, the audience here, certainly on Zoom, those of you who registered, made this point that you think that a referendum on major issues are important. The issue of trust in government was raised. Very, very important matter of the extent to which we don't trust government, so we don't want to get involved. We don't want to say much. The divisiveness in our two-party system, those issues came up, and I think we're all concerned about that as a way that limits people's participation. And we think that it is important that you strengthen the voice in so doing. Paul Ivy made an important point about citizen education. That is key. Consciousness raising, as he talked about with respect to Garvey's way of framing this issue. What it means to be a citizen in a democracy. So important. And we have access to information. That's the place to start. We can't lift it up to our representatives. We have to get involved. We are the shareholders. We own the country. So those are some of the key messages that we've heard tonight. And we want to go beyond the talk of this forum to action. So I'm going to invite a young advocate. We're hearing from all these youth advocates. Sabrina has been very vocal tonight, making her voice heard. And we want to hear from Theo Knight Tomlinson, and he's going to do our call to action tonight. He's a very passionate young man, participates in a range of leadership forums, advocacy, media, and communication, and he's the founder of Youth Voice. And Theo also is a youth member of Parliament during the period 2018 to 19, and he's a Kingston and St. Andrew Parish Youth Council Chief PRO, the Public Relations Officer, and a member of the Advocates Network. So let's hear from Theo. Theo, what do you make of all of this, and how do we take all of this and turn it into action?
Good night, everyone. I'm not sure if you can hear me, but
yes, we can.
All right, beautiful. I want to say, first of all, it was an awesome pleasure. Well, not was, but has been an awesome pleasure. If you weren't at part one, let me tell you from now, you will have missed a lot, but not to worry, you catch this one, and I'm pretty sure you can go back to watch. But I want to say, wow, tonight, some gems were dropped, some most important things that we have to highlight were dropped. And one of the most important things that I could take away from this was especially the conversation that was held about, how is it that our elected officials, or how is it that we can be held accountable? And I want to just add my 2 cents to it, because now I think we have, bypassed the fact that we have now reached into an age where we no longer need to look at the JAM or those organizations. We have now seen where persons have now taken the action to use their social media platforms, their Instagram, their Twitter, their Snapchat, their even WhatsApp, because the WhatsApp part of it. And we have seen that in recent times, especially in a more prominent and most heartfelt case that we have going on now with the influencer that's missing that I won't dwell on. But just to share with you 5 key points in how it is that you can be a part of the call to action is starting with your knowledge. Now, what is your knowledge? Inform yourself about the importance of your role in society. For example, your responsibility, part- participatory democracy, sovereignty of the people, the role of a constitution, and the Unity philosophy. Read the 1962 Jamaican Constitution. We have all of this information online, everyone. Let's not just use our phones to go to the TikTok, the WhatsApp, or even on just Facebook and IG. Let's use it to keep ourselves informed because being informed is the only way that we can tackle all of these issues that are faced. And don't believe that only persons like Dr. Ivy, Sabrina, Miss Archer, Miss Hamilton, Miss Phillips, Sir Levy are the only persons who can stand up and make their voices being heard. I've always said this is my mantra. We're not just a voice for the voiceless, but what we are is that we're an echo for the voices. And that brings me to my second point, or dialogue with others. Each one teach one, iron sharpeneth iron. Discuss what you learn with others, especially your friends and families. Encourage them to have similar discussion with others. Use social media and facilitate widespread positive information, sharing and getting feedback, shared views, encourage shared action. It is important, important, important that everyone's voice is being heard and that we have a discussion at the table. Because guess what? In order to achieve our Vision 2030 of making Jamaica a place to live, work, raise family, and do business. We all have to sit at the round table. We're all brave knights in this. We are all called to action. Our fourth part, sorry, I'm rushing it, but just to check if you were listening. Our third reason, our third call to action is to engage community or action group. Join or even create a community engagement or organization, service club or professional organization to strengthen voices with shared interests. Organize meetings online and face to face and other actions to address issues of concern to you and others. Online discussions and deliberative polling on civic issues enable the promotion of e-democracy by engagement. You deconstruct the capacity and capability of citizen to owners to meaningfully change Jamaica and to participate in the policy making process. Now, guys, throughout the three call to actions that I've just read, do you see how you play an important role in this democracy conversation? If not, I pray and hope the fourth and fifth point will teach you what you need and how it is that your role is important. Engage your elected representative. Now, how do we do this? Send emails, organize meetings, and share your views on issues that concern you and others. Engage dialogue. Pay attention and hold your representative accountable. Jamaican Accountability Meter Portal, JAMPI, makes this easier for you. If it is that you want to check out their website, you can follow www.jampijamaica.org. And trust me, guys, using your social is an important way. Let's not just use it to share, all the bad that's happening, but let's use it to connect because networking is important. And our fifth point, support advocacy campaign. To improve Jamaica, we encourage you to support the advocacy campaigns of the Advocates Network and and promote your rights as a human being and demand better governance. Guys, to strengthen public education about the role of citizens in reforming our constitution as we create a republic, we encourage you to support the following organizations who are actively engaged in the public education campaign entitled Our Jamaican Republic. We have Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal, JAMPI at jampja.org, the National Integrity Action, which can be reached at info@niajamaica.org. We have the Institute of Law and Economics, which can be reached at hello, so that's HELLO, at ILEJA.org. And we have, of course, Jamaica, the Advocates Network, which can be reached at advocatesnet@gmail.com. We're all here, everyone. We're all a part of the process. We're all a part of the one love. Let us be the group that change Jamaica for the better, voice by voice, opinions by opinions, advocacy by advocacy.
Wonderful.
Well done.
Thank you, Theo.
Thank you, Theo.
Yeah. So Theo, before you run though, tell us how you have been informing yourself and dialoguing with others. I know you have a lot of young people that you're engaging. Tell us a little about that before you run.
Well, for me, what I do in keeping myself abreast is that I use my social to follow up and do readings, and especially not just nowadays reading as we call it, but also going back to read, because most importantly, as Marcus Garvey said, you can't know the future that you want to go towards unless you know the roots that you're coming from. And what I do is that I try to share this information that I have, with persons my age who, are quote unquote said not to be readers, but are more Gen Z technological savvy. And from this, we always have discussions, because one thing I always say to people, young people don't discredit conversations. They're always open to it. But what makes the difference? How it is that we approach them. And for me, one of the most useful way in which I approach the youth that I've engaged and speak and spoke with them about change is that I've always gone with, hey, how do you see yourself in the next 5 years? How is it that you see the country that you want to live in? Because when we look at Vision 2030, the persons who are going to live in Vision 2030 are the youths of the now, not the youths of tomorrow, not the youths that were past, but the youths of the now. And so, having these conversations and this dialogue with them is crucial. And that is how I try to disperse my findings that I've found. And also through my youth organization called Youth Sports. It's a group of youth willing to dedicate their time to also educating other youths and also being a voice and also being an echo for the voices.
I'm just so impressed that, you're under 20, let me say 18, right? A teenager, and you formed an organization, Youth Voices. And I think you recognize that the voices of young people must be heard. You've put a framework in, enough respect. Congratulations for the work that you do. I know Sabrina is a part of this effort, and a lot of other young persons who are here listening today and are part of this effort. We have to collaborate across the generations, across all the divides, in order for us to push Jamaica in the direction we want. Thank you so much, Theo. Thanks for your voice. Thanks for all that you do. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And Horace, as we wrap up, and I thank you as part of the panel, you must feel good that you hear from people like Theo and Sabrina, young people who have learned from people like you, your work, you've laid a path, And they are following and adding and shaping and recreating and dashing away some of the things you say and adding to some of the things you say. That's the dynamic of our youth, and we're really, really so proud to be part of that collaboration that can push Jamaica forward. Thank you, Horace. Thanks for being part of the panel tonight. Thank you so much for all that you do. Dr. Paul Ivy, really, really happy that you were here with us. Thank you for the publications, and Horace, for yours as well. Both written very important works that we all need to put our hands on. And thank you, Paul, for being with us tonight and sharing your words of wisdom. And young Sabrina Barnes. Sabrina, boy, what can I tell you? Enough respect, my sister.
Thank you.
You did very well. And, you know, we're all so impressed with you and your passion. And just don't let anyone, you know, discourage you and frustrate you as you push forward. Yes, absolutely. We're not ease up, right? Continue to do the work you do and continue to be the voice, not only of young people in Jamaica, but the voice of Jamaica and the voice of our future. Thank you so much, my darling. And I want to thank Jeanette Calder, as usual. Thanks for your opening, Jeanette, and for the work you do in JAM. And again, if you don't know anything about JAM, the Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal, please go on JAM's website and make sure that you know the awesome work that JAM is doing, Jeanette and her team is doing to make this and other kinds of initiatives possible for us to help with this heavy lifting of our roles as citizens in a democracy and the kinds of monitoring and advocacy that we absolutely need to do in order to be active. I want to thank also Trevor Monroe. I don't know if Trevor is with us tonight. I know he's been overwhelmed from the National Integrity Action. He's a part of the team. NIA has been doing so much over the past many years, tackling issues of corruption, integrity in government, and so on. Thank you, Trevor, for the work that you continue to do. And also the Institute of Law and Economics, led by our young Dwayne Gottsmeer. Thank you, Dwayne. Thanks to you and your team for the work that you continue to do to lift our voices and make our voices heard with respect to not only this forum, but all the forums that are part of this series. And to the Advocates Network, I see a lot of you here tonight. I see Patricia, you've been very active, and all the other advocates here. Enough respect, continue to do the work that you do. And, you know, we continue. We now ease up. Thank you so much. And the only person I've left out, I think, is Jeanette Lewis, who has been part of the team that puts and organizes this together. And Jeanette Lewis has been working in the background and made sure that we're all organized and we can bring this to you. So I just want to end on this note. Paul Ivy made it, and it's saying that I love to use because it puts in perspective, and I think it sums up all that we're saying today. The power of the people is greater than the people in power. Make your voices heard. Thank you so much for staying with us tonight. Thank you so much for being part of our conversation. Thank you so much for all that you do. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone.
Follow that dream.
Follow your dreams.
With all your might, you're a beacon. So let your light shine bright. Let that dream guide you to your destiny. Be the best of what you were meant to be.
To see Jamaica moving a new direction.
Good politicians
that represent our intentions.
Good education, less kids in detention.
Where we run things, did I forget to mention?
Dream for pass couple and CXC. My dream for have the doctorate and every degree.
On the race, negative mentality.
I see everybody proud of me. So we all tell them, you have a dream, me have one too.
So let's put on the one with the Republic dream. And we Republic are gonna grow that dream.
My dream is to live in peace. One sleep and never run and off if your teeth. Tired of the indiscipline that a cause the community nothing but grief.
I say my dream for child abuses. Want stop it trafficking local and overseas. Hey, let me tell you about the dreams of dreams. I feel live in a place where no two need police. You have a dream, me have one too.
So make we talk about what we drink and do. To make life better for me and you.
I mean say what we are gonna do. We are gonna
talk about we dream, act about we dream.
not skylark with the dream.
Know that dream of the Republic dream. And we Republic are gonna grow that dream. My dream is a Jamaican head. No Queen as head, no royal head.
We want, you know what I mean? You see?
To be united and to be uplifting as a nation could be. Jamaica, say that I feel we country. All positivity, we have to force it.
My dream for our republic is that we live as one, where instead of a few making decisions, we have more inclusion.